2008's favorite bromance has signs of a little trouble in paradise. Former President Barack Obama recently warned President Joe Biden about GOP rival Donald Trump and his strategies, including having an iron grip on a loyal base. This, according to a new report in the Washington Post.
In a private lunch at the White House that took place in June, Obama also vowed that he would do everything in his power to help Biden's reelection effort. Here to discuss further is Michael LaRosa, former press secretary for First Lady Jill Biden. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being with us.
Yeah,
so, fill us in on what the state of the Obama-Biden relationship is now, to the best of your knowledge.
Well, it sounds pretty good. He was over at the residence for lunch a couple weeks ago, and I think they were having, a pretty candid conversation and a pretty pragmatic conversation about the next election. And I think it's important that what President Obama said to President Biden, that all Democrats here, that you can't take this guy lightly. He has a loyal base, a loyal following, a cult-like following who will show up in big numbers. And we have to work on doing the same with our folks and energizing our folks. So I think it's important that Democrats hear that message right away and that we don't take anything for granted.
I think that's right. So much of the pushback, especially from the further left section of the broad left, is that there's been a lot of blaming of voters who don't seem to appreciate that Biden has actually done a good job. Mm-hmm. We hear Bidenomics, and the response is, well, why don't these disgruntled leftists, why don't the disgruntled liberals or independents who are saying they're going to stay home or choose one of these other candidates, why don't they understand that Biden has actually been good for the economy? And the pushback has been, okay, well, there have been long-standing issues, failure for wages to keep up with inflation. People are struggling in various different kinds of ways that are separate and apart from what anybody does in a 4-year term. And so what is Biden going to do to actually convince people that there's going to be real material changes in the next cycle, and that it's not just another kind of vote blue no matter who, you got to come out for us because Donald Trump is an existential threat sort of a pitch?
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. I don't know if there's going to be you're going to see much of a change in direction or tone. I feel like the White House was pretty empowered after the midterms, which had historic turnout, but also the overperformance for Democrats was historic for a presidential midterm in their own party. And so they feel pretty validated about accomplishing substantive things that Democrats have been trying to do for decades that were not done, like student loans, like climate legislation.
But on the student loan point, I would argue there's a lot more animosity as
He's trying to deliver. And the bottom line is, it's early. Democrats will start being juiced up when they have a foil to run against, when they know it's a rematch, when they know who the alternative. It's ultimately a decision and a choice between two different people. And Democrats have to decide, what choice they're going to make.
Well, Michael, you just opened up a whole can of worms. Because first of all, many people are frustrated that even though this is in fact primary season, there is already this presumption that Joe Biden is the only candidate, that there don't need to be any debates. The media largely isn't acknowledging the existence of certainly Marianne Williamson. RFK Jr., because of his polling numbers, has kind of forced himself onto the national stage, and he is recognized by the press, but only in a very dismissive, derisive sort of a manner. Yeah. So the idea that there's just two choices is already something that people are frustrated by and skeptical about, especially since huge percentages, majorities of Democratic voters even, and overwhelming majorities of all Americans don't want to see this Trump-Biden matchup again.
They may not have a choice.
So then what is your pitch? Because you brought up student debt, but obviously that student debt policy was thwarted by the court.
Let's talk about where we are at this point.
Sure.
Okay? We are at a point where in 1992, that incumbent president was being challenged. 1995, the sitting governor of Pennsylvania, Robert P. Casey, was challenging President Clinton. People forget these things. And in 2011, Harry Reid reportedly had to talk Bernie Sanders off the ledge from primarying President Obama. We are at a very normal stage where, candidates are popular. Governing isn't always popular. Governing is harder and it's more divisive. Like Mario Cuomo said, you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. Right now, people are venting. A small pocket of people of Democrats are venting their frustration that there isn't an alternative. But look, there usually isn't. He's the leader of the party. He's going to be He's going to be the nominee, and he's ultimately going to face, like any other incumbent. No other incumbent would engage in a debate with a weak challenger or a nominal challenger.
Maybe not. Trump is also not engaging in a debate, but the RNC is still holding debates, and the other candidates do have an opportunity to bring their case to the American
They don't have
public.
an incumbent, and President Trump at this point in his cycle was being primaried, I believe, by 2 ex-governors and 1 ex-congressman, much more serious candidates than President Biden has, and he didn't do any debates.
No, you can say serious or not serious, but the last polls show that they had a combined 30% of the votes. Now RFK Jr. has come down to 13%, Marianne's at 10%. Both are polling higher than every single person in the Republican field against Donald Trump, except for Ron DeSantis, and now in the most recent poll, Vivek Ramaswamy is up.
I agree that both Trump and Biden are extremely overwhelmingly likely to be the respective, nominees of their parties, and we are headed for a rematch. Something wild could happen, but it's pretty likely. Trump's popularity with the Republican Party, him being the focal point, is, if anything, getting stronger in the wake of all these indictments and everything. Do you have any concern that Democrats are almost sitting like they think, oh, this is great, it'll be Trump again, we beat him once, we can do it again. But then when we see poll number, 43-43, right? We talked about that yesterday. Mm-hmm. It's so close. The last election was close. Mm-hmm. It seems sometimes to me that Democrats want to be running, they just describe Trump as this existential threat to democracy, but they want to be running against him because Hillary Clinton despise him. She wanted that, and are we doing that again?
Well, the difference is now we have, I think, he earned goodwill in 2016 because he didn't have a record. For the last 3 elections, what we know, let's just go with what we know. Mm-hmm. What we know is that in the last 3 election cycles, independents have fled from the Republican Party for Democrats because they are running scared from this guy. They do not support they do not support Trump when it comes to the ballot box, at least in 2018, in 2020, and in 2022. So it's been a referendum on him 3 times. So now we're going for a 4th time. And it has been close. So that was the point of President Obama's message. We can't take anything for granted. The country is still divided. The country is still tribal. It was the 7th close election in history. Not terribly close. The president did win by 6 million votes. President Trump did lose to Hillary Clinton by 3 million votes.
He could get even more votes next time, yes. But it's not the votes overall that matters, right? It's the voters in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Arizona and Georgia.
But it's not his legal issues that Democrats are. His legal issues have proven he irrelevant. Like his following and his supporters will be with him no matter what he does. So the noise out there with his legal issues really. I don't even consider when you're talking about electoral politics, because really it's about what independents think and what independents care about, and all we can go on is what we know. That's why anybody else but Trump is pretty.
But are you worried about a voter who says to themselves, who voted for Trump the first time, then voted for Joe Biden in 2020 because the antics of Trump during COVID were just beyond the pale, and you were sick of this guy, and now you've had 4 years, and maybe you're worried about the economy fundamentals. Trump's a little bit back of your mind now. You go, a lot of people, even who don't like so much about Trump's behavior, liked the economy and the stability of the economic policies. Or do you worry that they'll pine for that and overlook the craziness that was so front and center when they voted for Joe Biden in 2020?
I think it's possible. I don't know if it's enough to overcome President Biden had a 38% approval rating going into the last midterm cycle. We had a 40-year record high inflation, and voters did not punish President Biden or his party.
Yeah, I appreciate that. They did much better than I expected.
And you also had the Dobbs decision.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Exit polls showed you that Was it a referendum on the Democratic Party and the support of the Democratic Party in Biden's presidency, or was it a referendum on the fact that people just wanted to maintain the right to choose and were angry at Republicans? And if it's the latter, how do you maintain that going into an election year 2 years later when people's memories are short and when, frankly, there's also a lot of frustration that during the Obama administration, despite running on a promise to codify Roe, he declined to do so, in some people's cynical view, precisely so that the Democratic Party can continue to use it as a bully pulpit to get people to the polls.
Well, look, we have to keep reminding them. I mean, that's what happened last cycle, right? Everybody thought it was going to be a referendum on the economy and on the 40-year high inflation, and it wasn't. It was about people don't like their rights taken away. And we have to keep Democrats, it's going to be their job, the campaign's job, to remind those people in Pennsylvania, especially the suburban women who are swing voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin, to remind them that Republicans want to take away your rights and Democrats do not. 44
million Americans stood to benefit from student debt cancellation. Now they're facing the prospect of having their loans turned back on at the beginning of next month, in less than a month. They benefited from Donald Trump having imposed a student debt moratorium for the last 3 years, and it's going to be Joe Biden who's responsible for turning it back on. What do you make of that?
The moratorium was put in place during
COVID.
During COVID,
yes.
Right, okay.
While Donald Trump was president.
That's correct. And so now President Biden has helped rescue the economy, bring back the jobs back to pre-pandemic levels. So we're starting to reassimilate back to life pre-COVID, at least. And student loans are a part of that. Now, that was part of why he wanted to do legislation. The Supreme Court interceded.
So why agree to turn, in the context of the debt standoff, the debt ceiling standoff, the one significant concession that Joe Biden gave to the GOP was to commit to ending the student debt moratorium? Why? How does he look those 44 million Americans in the face?
This is exactly why governing is never popular, but rhetoric usually is when you're running on a campaign. For the first time. Look, governing is harder because it involves compromising. People don't like that. There's no instant gratification in that, right? Long term there is. Long term he's hoping to get his legislation passed.
I think a lot of Americans are going to be asking the question why the people who are too poor to afford to go to college are the ones that had their financial futures the basis of the grand compromise, and not any number of other people with a lot more significant monetary interest in the country.
There are other voters who think they should just pay back the
loans that they took out.
That they agreed
if you're taking out loans, they are loans for a reason, right?
Right. Well, I see a lot of agreement between someone who's the Democratic Party and someone who's in the Libertarian Party, and I think that there's a lot of working class and poor people who have different kinds of populist interests.
There are a lot of working class people who paid back their debts and would be resentful that they made different choices.
Make the argument to the audience. You don't have to make it to me, and the polls are behind me, and 44 million Americans are the ones that need to be convinced that they're lazy bums that should have paid back their loans. Is that the pitch that's going to get them to go vote for Joe Biden? I'm not sure that's the case.
No, but what I will say is this, that elections come down to a choice between two people. Just really quickly, anecdotally, there's somebody I met recently who is lifelong third-generation law enforcement. His whole family comes from a family of police officers and firefighters, and his dad was on his way to go vote for Trump, and this man was going to vote for Joe Biden, and the father didn't understand why. And because this guy said, "Who do you want your two grandsons to look up to? Who do you want them to be a role model? Who do you want to be their role model? Donald Trump or Joe Biden?" And ultimately, voting, like we talked about before the election, it doesn't always come down to economics. It comes down to how you relate to a person's values and how you relate to the people on the ballot that you have to vote for, because it's a personal choice and it's a choice between two people. And I think that choice is going to be pretty easy to make.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, it's worth noting we are in a primary, and there are 3 Democrats running in the primary. And of course, Cornel West is also running as a Green Party candidate. We'll see if there's any other people that will announce third-party campaigns as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael.
You're welcome. Anytime.
We're rising right after this.